I think Invasion of the Body Snatchers is everywhere.
The whole film was done in a spirit of great fun.
There seems to be always some interest somewhere to remake Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and that's got to be a testament to the original theme buried in the Siegel and Jack Finney book, that, you know, we're constantly afraid of something in any era.
Well, Jack Finney wrote basically a science fiction story that was turned into a film by Don Siegel, a wonderful film. When I was thinking about doing this, I happened to know Don Siegel, and I went into his office to say, I'm thinking of doing a remake of this movie of yours that I really respect a lot. It's a beautifully done film. And as I was talking to Don, who should pop in but Kevin McCarthy, who this was on the MGM lot, and he was doing another movie. And the two of them sat down with me, and they started telling me what they really had in mind. Even though they liked the original, they had an ending that didn't let the audience off the hook. Also, they had some humor that the studio cut out.
They took it down to Long Beach and showed the film. And the film was terrific, you know, and they were so thrilled because you would have laughter and then screams, and then laughter and then screams, and then laughter and then really screams. It was perfect. And they took it back, and they were so thrilled when they took it back to Allied Artists, and they showed the film, and they played them the recording of the sneak audience. And the Allied Artists, the executive said, "Get rid of the laughter." You go, oh God.
The studio, didn't feel that humor in a horror movie really mixed. But to my mind, and really to Don Siegel's mind, that could only make the film scarier, which is one of the reasons I wanted to do a remake of it. I don't really look on our version as a remake, because it's really totally different. It goes back to Jack Finney's source, but it's really a reimagining, in a way, a variation on a theme. We could explore a little bit more of the characters and what makes a pod and what makes people be not pods. And is that not poddiness worth preserving? And that was sort of what Bob Solo, W.D. Richter, and I really set out to do.
Well, the Finney book, I think, is popular through the years because it plays on a fear that we all have, that people around us are turning secretly on us behind our backs, and if we close our eyes, they'll get us. And that plays out over decades because we're always afraid of somebody.
We started out with the same small city idea that was in Jack Finney's novel, which really was someplace north of here.
And that was very difficult because it seemed like the world was somewhere else, and here we were in the boondocks, you know, thinking about, well, what are even the locations? Where do people live?
And then we sort of felt that as time went on, 20 years had passed really since that film was made, that the real paranoia was starting to lurk more and more in big cities. We decided, let's see what we can do with paranoia coming to a big city. And the basic thing that came to me, probably when I was talking with Kevin McCarthy, was to say, well, how can I get Kevin into this movie? Let's just suppose that he had left the last movie where he wanted to leave it, which is running out of the small town saying they're here. And let's just suppose that he ran for 20 years trying to spread the word. The British are coming, the pods are coming, whatever it was. I lived in San Francisco, and it's my favorite city, really my favorite city in the world.
And it seemed like the right place, you know, it had that kind of San Francisco slightly offbeat quality, which the characters in the movie have, you know. Jeff Goldblum's a failed poet, and Kibner's a sort of goofy psychologist who writes self-help books and things. You know, it all had a kind of nice San Francisco air to it.
The context of the movie was in a kind of a feel-good therapy atmosphere where hugging and explaining away all your problems as sort of psychological projections of these inner things, all that stuff was very current at the time.
It was a time when we still believed, sort of, that we could affect something in this country.
We'd grown so disillusioned with the larger society around us, with the treachery of the government, with things that just weren't working right, that this big inward look started taking place, the me generation, a huge cliche of pop culture. But nevertheless, people were closing off. Under sort of cover of we're all reaching out to find out who we are and to be one kind of, one Earth, one planet. But to get there, you have this sense of, I got to find out who I am first. I've got to become very self-centered, very inward directed and looking in.
1978, sort of the end of a kind of hippie era, there was still, a residue of that, but there were also, as exemplified by Leonard Nimoy, the kind of pop psychologists who were telling everybody to relax, everything's going to be okay, take it easy. In a sense, trying to humanize people by dehumanizing them in some way. He did a lot of, little variations on that character.
Leonard Nimoy, he was terrific. He was a lot of fun, and of course, coming off of Star Trek, which he had been on, and that's automatically what you think.
There's a little bit of the sternness of Spock in there, but there's that softness that Leonard added of the Birkenstock sandals and the arm pads and little thing he wears on his hand and the soft tailoring and the soothing voice. He turned into a really interesting character. The last person you might think would become a pod becomes one of the early pods.
Don't be trapped by old concepts.
The idea of the pod became a symbol or a metaphor of the standardized thing that the culture was asking of us. It was asking us all to create a new mass culture, something that would work on the world scale, and in order to do that, you had to sacrifice some individuality. So you had to get squeezed down into some kind of a pod.
And that's one of the interesting paradox of the film, is that these things, these elements of individuality are sort of shunned by pods.
There's no need for hate now, or love.
When I think about what might have inspired me or Phil or all of us to make this version, I don't think of science fiction, because science fiction tended to be drifting toward big pyrotechnical effects and larger-than-life dangers and monsters and threats, and the budgets were going up. And we were really interested in a human story here.
Our Body Snatchers is really about, characters and developing that human thing. I always viewed it as sort of a tragic love story between Donald Sutherland, Brooke Adams, but also between a band of friends, all of whom in one way or another love each other.
There's a nice moment where Donald Sutherland has Elizabeth, the character Elizabeth, roll her eyes around in her head. And although it's a crazy thing, to him it proves she's not crazy.
If you're not crazy, you can do the thing with your eyes.
That was such a human, such a charming thing, and the way Donald reacts to her and looks at her, there's something, none of us could have anticipated the kind of love that passes between them, but it's a love of friendship.
It was for me, a very creative experience. I loved working with Veronica and Brooke. Leonard was terrific. Jeff is good.
Jeff Goldblum and Veronica Cartwright, they call themselves the dancing Belichicks. They come dancing through our set doing a pas de deux.
This all started when we were in the showers, because they had all those shower curtains, and so we would come in and we'd have to see, and then we'd close, and we would have to run off, and to get the angle and the way the curtains were blowing and everything like that, and be able to pick the guy up that was in the bathtub and stuff like that. We got to the point, we did it so many times, we would do da-da-da-da-da, we were just sort of, so we became known as the dancing Belichicks, and we would sort of dance on together and dance off. It was hysterical.
Film should be fun to make. You gather your group of friends around, people, even though you know what you're going for in each scene, you leave enough room and enough air in the film for creative people to add certain things. So, Yeah, my wife Rose plays a small role. A bunch of writer friends of mine are in the bookstore. You know, throughout the piece, there are San Francisco actors, friends of mine, who, in one way or another, are transformed into pods.
All the film people of San Francisco wanted to be pods, but we were very selective on who we would let be pods. You had to earn it.
Mike Chapman is in the film. He plays a guy who's sort of cleaning, polishing the floors of the health department. And there's something ominous about it.
They are wonderful people in it, you know. I mean, you turn around, and I love Bobby Duvall. And you turn around and he's there. He's just a priest in the corner. I love that. Don Siegel played the taxi driver.
I'm sure I've told this story before, but it's true. I was in the front seat, in the passenger seat in the front with a handheld camera, filming them in the back and then filming Don Siegel from the side and all that. And I remember thinking that, boy, they're really acting well. They look scared in their back and everything. And I found out that what they were scared of was that Don Siegel could barely see, but out of vanity had taken his glasses off and was driving through the streets of San Francisco. And Donald and Brooke were genuinely scared.
I remember we were running one night, running through the streets. You know, there was so much running through the streets. And Brooke Adams was really a great runner. And Donald was, you know, I remember him running all the time in the mornings. But as they were running one night, Brooke said, "I can beat you, Donald." And he said, come on. Yeah. So, you know, I said, action, and they went running, and I said, cut, and they didn't stop running. And she was in her high heels and a red dress, and they just went running off into the distance. And when they came back, she said, "I won." You could ask Donald if she won.
I have way longer legs than Brooke has. Yeah, I could outrun her way. I ran a lot during that period. And when I was running, I was crossing the street this way, and a Volkswagen Beetle had not seen me and made a right turn and hit me, and I bounced up over his roof. And as I came down, my face passed his windscreen. And I could see the driver's mouth saying, "Oh God, not you."
If you look at Donald Sutherland as the main character, as the Hamlet of our piece, so to speak, it's really the story of the development of a pod. And if you were a pod audience out there, you'd be very happy with the way he comes out at the end of the movie.
The end scene, Donald had been told something and I was told something else. And it was not scripted. We didn't know how it was going to end.
You know, they all, wanted to be part of the big dialogue, you know, that we all know what the scene is in general, and then it's my job to privately go with each of them and tell them things that the other people in the scene might not know about what their character is going to do.
I had been told one thing to do, and he had been told what he was to do. And then we just went in, and I called for him. I thought he was normal. And then he turned around and did that weird thing. And so the whole end was like totally spontaneous.
Well, making this movie was one of the truly pleasurable experiences in a business that doesn't really offer you that many thoroughgoing, wonderful times.
It seems to me that the movie works in that way of just having a wonderful, jolly good time for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And we went into it with that frame of mind, and I think it shows in the movie.
It was an exciting and very pure and politically sensible and intellectually and heartfelt. It was stable to be in, and it continues to garner praise. People still watch it. It was a pleasure to do it.
The Philip Kaufman version is one of the darkest color films I've ever seen. I really had to strain to see the details of it, and that's an important part of this process of drawing you in to pay more attention, and then they can shock you with something.
What we really wanted to do here was to try to create in color what film noir did in black and white, and there really hadn't been much of that done. We really didn't have any color precedence there.
And he hired a great cinematographer, Mike Chapman. And if you look at that movie, as I did recently, it's incredible what kind of a contribution Mike made, because it's subtle stuff all over the movie, whether he's shooting through glass or whether he's giving you extraordinary shadow play on the wall.
I had done already several movies with Phil, and that was always fun. So I jumped at the chance.
We spent a lot of time actually at the Pacific Film Archives when preparing, looking at a lot of film noir, classics, some of the great cinematographers.
We wanted to emphasize a kind of visual paranoia that you're looking here and you're looking there and you don't know what's going on. So I would act with the camera that way.
There are some Hitchcock techniques that he uses, film noir type of techniques. For instance, when there's an Asian woman who's been infected and her husband is worried about her, when you see that woman, she's in shadow, her face is in shadow, and then she steps out into the light. But that little bit of shadow across her mouth is right out of the Hitchcock playbook and ties the movie a little bit with this expressionistic world.
That's not my wife.
He and I would go out onto the streets together because we wanted that authentic thing of the real San Francisco, of a city, the dawn of pottiness there, or it was lurking there in the streets, and that anybody could be enveloped by it. If a bus goes by and we had a handheld camera and you just see people, exhausted people just sitting there at the end of the day, or just to have the camera move through streets of shoppers, having lost their souls in a department store. So one of the ways we did it, I remember, was he would sort of wrap a coat around the camera, and the two of us would just sort of walk down the street, and then he would sort of swing around and follow somebody.
We just wanted to be as discreet as possible, and not call attention to ourselves. So if it was a little airy, probably, and with an eyepiece like that, and I could just, or with nothing, and I could just aim it and figure out where I was going. And if you did that without any lights, or without anything calling attention to you, or the assistant directors stopping people or stuff like that, you could just wander down the street, and we did.
Riding back from the shoot, he would photograph out the window the nighttime buildings of San Francisco and catch these sort of eerie people in their offices just before they left at the twilight time. And some of the montages have those stolen moments in them. There's an amazing sequence in the movie inside a bedroom where Donald Sutherland has just brought Kibner in, and Elizabeth is lying in her own greenhouse about to become a pod. It's a very crowded, small room. And it sort of occurred to all of us when Phil tried to block the thing that the room was really small, and there were probably 6 or 7 people in it. And how on earth is he going to cover this? And Mike said, "Give me the camera."
And for that, Mike Chapman dressed totally in black and sort of did a dance through all of the characters so we could shoot 360 degrees without any reflections of the camera showing up.
And he put the camera on his shoulders and said, "Just everybody play the scene." And he stood in the middle of it. And he would just whip around here or there, get a close-up, drag the camera across somebody else.
I did that because I wanted to sort of make the camera be a person and go here at a certain line and there and sort of wander around and look at things, So I did operate it. Yeah.
And it's really wonderful because it's edgy, and you realize the camera's standing in the center of it, and he's trying to, on his feet, solve a disastrous scheduling problem because we would have needed 4 days to figure out how to cover it conventionally.
Mike Chapman had a great appreciation for what the great cameramen had gone before, and not that he was trying to copy them, but just be stimulated by them and be true to what their visions were. And he was a great film scholar.
I think we thought we would sort of have fun with it and have sort of slightly campy shadows and angles and this and that were somewhat self-conscious, because the movie's self-conscious, but I think in a good way.